Yeah, why not? Yeah. Welcome back to Revival, where this week we're at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, recreating one of the most brutal yet forgotten episodes from the English Civil War, the siege. They were a nasty business and affected more people than all the pitched battles put together, and they also developed weapons of mass destruction that a 21st century dictator would have been proud of. Sieges dominated the conflict. Welcome back to Revival, where this week we're at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, recreating one of the most brutal yet forgotten episodes of the English Civil War, the siege. Sieges affected more people in the country than all the pitched battles put together, and they were a brutal business. They also developed weapons of mass destruction that most 21st century dictators would have been proud of. Yeah. Welcome back to Revival, where this week we're at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, recreating one of the most brutal yet forgotten episodes from the English Civil War, the siege. Welcome back to Revival, where this week we're at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, recreating one of the most bollocks, no we're not. Okay, sorry. Welcome back to Revival, where this week we're at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, recreating one of the most brutal yet forgotten episodes of the English Civil War, the siege. Sieges occupied more time and more lives than all the pitched battles put together, and they also developed weapons of mass destruction that most 21st century dictators would have been proud of. Welcome back to Revival, where this week we're at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, recreating one of the most brutal yet forgotten episodes of the English Civil War, the siege. Sieges occupied more lives and more time than all of the famous pitched battles put together, and they also generated weapons of mass destruction that most 21st century dictators would have been proud of. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of cavaliers and roundheads, and of course the beheading of the king. But today Revival sets out to tell the extraordinary story of what it was like for ordinary men and women who got caught in the crossfire when the army turned up. No, sorry, rubbish. Yeah. Hello, Nick. Okay. Yeah. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of cavaliers and roundheads, of Cromwell, and of course the beheading of the king. Yeah. Okay. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of cavaliers and roundheads, of great battles and of course the beheading of the king. But today Revival is telling the extraordinary story of what happened when the army turned up on your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, we're recreating the art of the siege. Okay. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of Cromwell, of cavaliers and roundheads, and of course the beheading of the king. But today Revival's telling the extraordinary story of what it meant for ordinary men and women when the army arrived on your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, we're recreating the art of the siege. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of Cromwell, of cavaliers, of roundheads, of great battles, and of course, the beheading of the king. But today Revival is telling the extraordinary story of what it meant when the army arrived on your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, we're recreating the art of the siege. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never had. Ah, bollocks. Sorry. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of Cromwell, of cavaliers and roundheads, and of course of the beheading of the king. But today Revival sets out to recreate the extraordinary story of what it meant when the army arrived on your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, we're reliving the life of the siege. I changed the word slightly. Hang on. Gusting there. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history of fuck. Okay. Hang on, Gust. Okay, Nick, good here. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. Today, sorry, it's gone blank. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of Cromwell, of cavaliers and roundheads, of great battles and of course the beheading of the king. But today Revival is telling the extraordinary story of what it meant when the army arrived on your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth... Oh, for fuck's sake. Okay. There we go. Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legend, of Cromwell, of cavaliers and roundheads, of great battles and of course of the beheading of the king. But Revival sets out today to tell the extraordinary story of what it meant for men and women when the army arrived on your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, we're recreating the art of the siege.
Try something.
Yeah?
Stand by. You call it when you're ready, brother.
Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of Cromwell, of cavaliers and roundheads, and of course of the beheading of the king. But today Revival sets out to tell the extraordinary story of what it meant when the army arrived on your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, we're recreating the art of the siege. Shit words, I thought.
You happy, Nick?
About it.
I'm ready. Hello, Nick. How's that for you? Revival is the show that takes your clothes off when you're not... Oh, okay, right.
Give me your in, Nick. Well in there.
Oh, you're in, mate. Yeah, you're in.
At borderline there, mate. Borderline. Yeah. Okay. Camera's rolling.
Okay. With you, Johnny.
Wait for the cut. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of Cromwell and cavaliers and...
Part of my life these days.
Yeah. A life backwards. Be a good title for a book.
Okay, camera's rolling.
Okay, stand by.
Okay.
Stand by.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Revival, the show that sets out to recreate life in the past. With stories and challenges that reveal new insights into each era, this is hands-on history as you've never seen it before. The English Civil War is the stuff of legends, of Cromwell and cavaliers and roundheads, and of course of the beheading of the king. But today Revival sets out to tell the extraordinary story of what it meant when the army came to your doorstep. Because here at Lulworth Castle in Dorset, we're recreating the art of the siege.
That's good. You make sure you've got the eaters separated from the ones we can use for cooking, we can make some good fortifying stew for the soldiers with them good big green ones, all right? Apple pie, yes. If indeed we have the flour left, we'll make an apple pie. That'll be lovely. You're getting that good and clean, aren't you? And there are more, I hear. There are more apples in the orchard, so we're going to have a good feed tonight. Oh, yeah, well, it's time of year where they could be ready. Good, well done. Well done. Did you see any blackberries out there? No? Oh, that's a shame. I'd have liked a blackberry and apple pie. It is my favourite. Yeah, no, it is. And careful of that bit of parsnip there. Look, there's a bit of parsnip there. Let's not waste anything. Oh, goodness, we can't afford to waste it. And I hope, Mistress, you're using those peelings to make a good soup. Good soup. We shall not waste anything in these desperate times. That's an eater. That's an eater. That's for stewing, that apple. Yeah? You can tell. You can tell by its gross greenness quite often. The proper job. We're doing well, actually. I'm very pleased. We're fortuitous that the food has lasted so well, and that harvest time is the time where we are besieged. It's foolish of the parliamentarians to come at us this day. We're still well stocked. I'm pleased. Do you know what breed that apple is there, Alfred? No? No? I think that could be one of the... Eh? Dustal. It could be a Dustal. I've not heard of that breed of Dustal. I think it might be one of them cocks, early cocks. Mighty Lake. That's good. I think this is good. I would suggest that as soon as possible we make haste and gather all the food stocks, even if unripe, and draw them into the house. That's good leek, good carrot. Do we have enough fuel to get us through the winter?
Hopefully.
This is a trifle extravagant, this fire now. More in there?
In the stores.
Uh-huh. And what's with this then? What's with this? Who caught this? Who caught this lovely coney? Who got him? Yeah?
Can you do that again? Can you pick it up?
Yeah? Well, you don't look then. You do something else. I'll ask the ladies about it. Ladies, who caught this lovely coney here? Did you catch it, mistress? No? Tis fair, tis fair, look. Only a little blooded. He'll be fine. Keep the skin, keep the skin. We can do well with that. Yeah, poor little chap. But he's good food. And any more we can catch, you tell us where you see them, we'll get them. Pardon? You found one in the woods? One of them? Will you show young Alfred where it was, and we'll set the snares, Alfred. Yeah, set the snares. As long as it's not outside our picket line, we'll be fine. You know the picket line? You know the picket line where the soldiers go? Don't go beyond that.
Yeah, it's non-sync because Chris was talking. What's your shadow? Two more shots.
Aha.
Master Jules.
Master Chris. How are you?
Welcome to our humble abode.
Well, indeed, there's a lot of very angry fellas up on that mountain who are looking to do you some injury, I suspect.
Yes, yes. Those would be those ruffian parliamentarian types.
Yeah. Haha.
Master Jules.
Master Chris. Nice to see you.
Indeed, you.
Well, there's some very angry looking fellas up on that hill
Indeed.
up there who I suspect are going to do you some mischief.
I think that is their plan, sir. Yes, indeed.
This is extraordinary. I mean, we've come down from the siege to see what life was like, very much on the inside.
Okay.
And here we find you and your family preparing food. I didn't think you'd have a lot of food.
We were very wise, and indeed it is autumn time, so we have some stuff and food we've put by, and it is harvest, so we're lucky that we're able to gather in the vegetables, and you can see the herbs here and some of the fruit that is abundant at this time of year. And we're lucky because we have access outside of the besieged area, and this was quite common during sieges, that in fact, although the impression is that they were tightly controlled, many of them were, but also there was opportunities to get out. If you knew the way through the country lanes, through the hedges, you could find your way to where you knew there was food. And what we have here is food from our own garden that we planted in spring before the siege, and we are also able to find things outside of the siege area.
So,
Sorry, okay, stand by, and
aha,
Master Jules,
Master Chris.
you've come to relieve the siege.
Well, if only I could. There's some very angry-looking people up there who I suspect aren't going to let you out in a hurry.
I don't think they will, indeed.
But you've got an amazing setup here. I didn't realise there'd be this much food inside a siege.
Indeed, inside a siege, it was a changing story, obviously. But we're here now in autumn, so we're in a time of abundance. And many of the grounds within the besieged area were planted out with vegetables and natural herbs grown wild, fruit that had been carefully tended over many years. So we've got some apples we're bringing in. And the other point to remember, of course, is that during sieges, they weren't always quite a close siege so that people couldn't get out. People who knew the area and knew it well, which was often the people inside, were able to sally out of the area
So it's
and
quite
gather other food.
a kind of porous arrangement between the enemy lines and the area that's actually under siege itself.
Indeed, it could be. There were examples, of course, where the siege, when you had many, many thousands of soldiers besieging, was able to provide a tight cauldron. But in fact, in most of the sieges, they never had enough men to actually spread a total tight ring around a besieged area, because they were quite large. So there would always be ways for people to get out. And during the development of siege warfare in the 17th century, there are many examples of extra ways being sought through cunning and guile to escape the besiegement and replenish your house inside.
So what were your chances of survival? I mean, presumably it would come down, A, to what you'd grown if you were at the lower end of society, but if you had money, I suppose, you could... Yeah, okay. So what were your chances of survival then? I mean, presumably if you had money at the top of society, you could buy your way to kind of eating well and looking after yourself, but if you were at the bottom end, you'd have to lay it all in and hope you just had enough to get by.
Well, indeed. I mean, we've got to remember that most people inside a besieged area would be servants or people that are employed by the master. So we have rich masters like the Marquis of Winchester at Basing House. He was one of the wealthiest men in Europe. He was able to buy provisions in on a regular basis, even during the siege. He was able to send out runners with money and actually allowed supplies to come in. As it got tighter and more controlled and his money ran out, he was unable to do that. But for the lowly sort of people, they would be very dependent on what they'd grown in their own gardens, what they could forage and put aside and keep preserved, and also what was then given if they joined a besieged encampment such as Basing House.
But what would be the motivation for somebody stuck in a siege who perhaps didn't want to be there but had nowhere else to go? I mean, for them, you know, life was intolerable, presumably. I mean, if they didn't believe in the cause, or the, you know, if they weren't a royalist or a parliamentarian, they were just stuck there as Joe Bloggs in the middle. It must have been a nightmare.
It must have been a nightmare, indeed, and it would have been very difficult to maintain your spirit and keep yourself true to the cause that you're representing. And because of this, we know there were a lot of people who crossed out, who came out. There were a lot of people who escaped from Basing House, for instance, who came out and got away as quickly as they possibly could. They knew this was developing into something they didn't like. If you knew nothing else and you were brought up and born on the estate of the Marquess of Winchester, you would know nothing else other than to serve with that household until the bitter end. So you would have stayed put. Those people would have stayed put.
So you're in for the duration, whether you like it or not.
Indeed, indeed.
But communication with the enemy in terms of trying to raise a siege, if somebody inside... Okay,
You're okay, sorry.
okay. But in terms of communication, actually trying to parley with the enemy, to try and raise the siege, to try and do a deal, I mean, was that equally possible?
Yes, it was possible, and both sides were still operating under some sort of code of honour amongst officers. So there was often dialogue between
There's
the
not
two.
a lot of code of honour up there, I can tell you.
No. Code of honour often goes by the way as the siege becomes more embittered. Early days, you would have been able to talk to each other. You'd send a drummer out. Drummers were considered to be, not fair game, so a drummer would carry a message out.
So they wouldn't get shot?
No, they wouldn't get shot, and they'd bring the message, the reply back. So there was communication, and many offers of raising the siege were made within our region here at Donington, at Basing House, and at Portsmouth. People were offered, surrender now, we'll let you go. If you stay, you're going to die. And that was essentially the terms that people came up with.
But it must have been very difficult, though, for the people actually managing the siege to kind of turn an offer like that down, knowing full well that everybody underneath them would be hoping that they'd give in and it would be over.
But you've got to remember, we are fighting for our lives now. The people inside would not be as well informed as we were about the nuances of the debate. I mean, they were royalists or they were parliamentarians, and they believed and lived for that cause. And anything other than that would probably mean death anyway. So as far as they were knowing and educated, they were fighting for a cause that meant live or die anyway. So there was no in-between for many of these people. You and I would have been in church 5-6 times on a Sunday. The whole world was so different from what we understand now, and belief was so different.
So your faith was in God, not the musket?
In God, indeed, and the musket. And the powder you have, you hope it stays dry. And if we can maintain the victuals to the troops, you are in for a good cause. 150 men held off 17,000 at Donington Castle. 300 held off a similar number at Basing House for many years. So we know the righteous and the strength is within the garrison. Those outside have got the major task to break the game of chess.
But the siege itself must have... Yep. But the siege itself must have devastated huge tracts of land around whichever point itself was being besieged. I mean, across the whole of the southwest and southeast of England, huge areas must have been laid waste by not just those people who were getting supplies in to keep the siege going, but those who were actually sitting on the outside, trying to sit it out.
Indeed. Two examples that are good for this, Donington Castle and Basing House again. We know for a fact, it's well recorded, documented, that the areas outlying, any housing within a mile was destroyed. If they could get there, they would set it on fire, they would destroy it, so it gave no succour to the besieging troops. At Basing House, the besieging troops lived in the most dire of circumstances. You know, we talk about trench warfare in the First World War. What was happening in this English Civil War was 10 times worse in terms of hygiene, food, nutrition, the whole thing. And they were living in trenches of 4 foot of water a lot of the time, the besieging troops at Basing. And they were dying like nobody's business. Through disease, let alone the actual firing and fighting that was going on
So
all the time.
being on the inside didn't necessarily mean... So I'll just say that again.
Yeah. Your question, water, and...
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
okay.
Okay, Jules, so stand by and action.
But what were the psychological tricks that the besieging force could play on you to weaken morale? Because it must have been on a knife edge all the time.
There were many things they would do. They would obviously sort of gather up the women that were around the area that they thought the men inside might know and do awful things to them in full public view. We won't go too far down that line, but could be pretty dirty. And they would also do things like fire in dead cattle, and they would fire over into the walls if they could, sort of things that would upset people, like, you know, a dead cat or a dead dog that was known to belong to somebody out there. There was lots of psychological things.
Presumably that would get eaten fairly quickly.
Oh, indeed it would. If you were hungry inside, you gathered everything. But they're in...
From the top there? Yeah, okay. Okay, sorry. But what were the sort of psychological tricks that the besieging force could play? Because presumably morale on the inside must have been on a knife edge. As the siege went on, it must have got worse and worse and worse.
There would be all sorts of trickery undertaken by the besieging forces outside. They would try and gather up people that they believed were known by those inside, particularly the women folk, and do great public acts of demeanour in front of the castle. That sort of thing would go on. There's no doubt about it.
So despite the fact there was this kind of notional gentleman's agreement over warfare...
That was between officers.
There were no holds barred for everything else?
No. The officers carried this sort of protocol between them. They would behave sensibly between each other. But the likes of you and I, who were at the receiving end of all of this, we would have been most disturbed by some of the things that we were confronting. I mean, animals that we knew, animals that we loved, dogs, anything, would have been fired over. They would be going out and around saying, who's this, you know, who do you know on the inside? Where's his animals? Let's fire them in. Let's cut them, you know, slaughter them, but waste the meat, you know, and that would have been the most insulting thing they could have done.
But also a bit of food on the inside on the way?
Well, it could be, as long as they hadn't, you know, done something nasty to it.
But I mean, one of the key things in any siege has got to be water, isn't it? I mean, without water, you're not going to last very long at all. And presumably maintaining that supply must have been the most crucial thing.
I think so. And I don't think anybody sensible would have set up a situation where they knew they were going to be besieged, or in a defensible situation where water wasn't available. Again, back to the two major examples, Donington and Basinghouse. Both of those places had deep wells dug, so they were accessing pure water. They knew that they would have a good water supply. However, also this was known outside, and there is a good documented attempt in Donington Castle where the water was poisoned by somebody from the outside sneaking in, and he could have opened the gates, but he sneaked in and he poisoned the water. Now they got back out. Councillor War, they'll all be dying in 4 days' time. We poisoned the water, and the man outside, the commander outside, said, "What do you mean you poisoned the water? This is ungentlemanly conduct." And he immediately sent back a messenger in saying, "Don't drink that water. Here's some fresh water in barrels."
But that's an extraordinary kind of irony between the kind of horror of a no-holds-barred situation where you're firing in cats, dogs, raping women outside the walls, etc., and then saying, "Sorry, chaps, we poisoned the water. You mustn't drink it."
Exactly. And there was a hangover, perhaps, of this Arthurian-type legend of noble knights treating each other with respect.
But I suppose that comes down there because it's usually the great and the good who were literate had that code and they wrote the history.
Exactly. You're on the nail there. What we have, the previous warfare in Europe, and most of these soldiers, particularly those inside the besieging places, were experienced soldiers, and they quite often knew the people on the outside. They'd served with them in Europe on the build-up to the 30 Years' War and beyond. The wars had been raging. And in Donington, you've got one of the most experienced commanders in the English Civil Wars, John Boys, who'd fought 20 years as a professional soldier in Europe. And the man who was outside had also fought 20 years on it.
So they were mates?
They were mates, they were friends. And he knew that it was out of order to poison Sir John Boy's water, so he sent a message in. And they survived again for another year because of that. They could have all fallen dead, but they survived because of the code of conduct. So it's a complicated affair. What I want you to understand is these things, they don't have iron rules, and they were complicated affairs. There was never such a closed, besieged and besieging thing going on. The whole thing was fluid. And there were times when it was very tight.
I left it there because that was a nice end. I suspect I've missed a...
That's great.
Okay.
So stand by, and we'll go to
I mean, the thing that strikes me about sieges, whilst there are some rules, there are inordinate dirty tricks. I mean, but... Sorry, start again.
Are we talking about Colchester?
Yeah, we're going to get to that, yeah. Okay. One of the things that strikes me about sieges, though, Chris, is that whilst there are this... Sorry. Get it right a bit. Hang on. One of the things that strikes me about sieges, though, Chris, is that whilst on one level you've got this kind of rack of rules and obligations to the nobility, at the other end it's a no-holds-barred thing. But what could you do to try and persuade them to come out and give up and move on? Because being outside was miserable, you wanted to move on as soon as possible. What kind of things would they get up to?
Well, they would offer good terms and conditions. I mean, that was quite interesting. They would offer, they would say, you can leave and you can bring everything with you, just let us in, you know. So, and for many people that would be an attractive offer, because death might be the alternative.
But was that honoured? Were people allowed out
Oh,
if they
yes,
agreed?
definitely. At the end, even though they'd been offered dire consequences at Donington Castle, because they'd fought so nobly, all of those soldiers were allowed to leave with their armament and with their arms, and they were allowed to march away in honour, and with their drums and colours as well, which was high honour.
But in communicating that to the inside, I mean, there must have been some kind of curious ways in which... Sorry, I'm pushing this the wrong way.
So, how would you be persuaded to give up and come out? What would persuade you to give up and come out?
And you could perhaps say one of the most inventive ways was the I'm trying to get to the arrow story, really.
So Chris could say, well, they would offer you, so what could persuade you to give up and come out?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, stand by, and off you go, John.
But what I mean, okay. So on one level, you can try and persuade them to come out by sending out a drummer, but how else could you do it?
Well, you could fire in messages, and at Colchester there was an interesting example where messages were sent in on arrows, and the you know, surrender now and we'll let you out, sort of thing. So arrows would be sent in.
Okay.
No,
We just want the bit about them coming back, don't we?
Need to give this. So they sent arrows in, offering pardon. This was Fairfax.
Yeah, Fairfax,
and,
sorry.
saying up and come out.
All right. Here we go.
Stand by.
We're running.
And when you
Soundman's laughing. All right. So how could they... What other ways would they have... Sorry, hang on. What other ways would they have of persuading you to kind of give up?
They would quite often send in messages which hopefully the troops would pick up. And they'd, in Colchester, an interesting example where they fired in arrows with messages on them saying to the soldiers, give up now and we'll let you leave with free passage, unharmed, you can take your arms, take anything that is belonging to you, but come out now.
Did it work?
No. The answer was replied from within the garrison of Colchester, an arrow with a turd on the end of it saying, smell this is my answer.
Well, have you got any answers you wanted me to take up the hill to those guys?
Well, I think we could be in trouble here, but I want to know where the Guinness is.
Okay, that's really nice. I want to pick that up from you, Jules.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want us to get that reaction?
Yeah, okay.
Come on, Jules.
So I'll ask the question, did it work? And we'll get the run into it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, stand by, and off you go.
But did it work?
Well, I believe not, because the answer was fired back out on an arrow with a,
Sorry, yes, no. That's fine, that's Jules, that's fine. And off you
But did it work?
No, I don't think so. An arrow was sent back out from the besieged garrison of Colchester, a turd attached to this arrow. Smell my answer, they said.
Have you got an answer you want me to take back up the hill?
Similar.
Okay, that's good. Let's go wide for that.
Okay, so we'll go from did it work again, yeah?
Did it work?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, stand by. Just quiet for a second for me, Annie, sweetie. Good girl. We're nearly done, obviously, you've been back. Stand by, and off you go.
So did it work?
No, the answer was fired back on an arrow with a turd attached saying, smell my answer.
So have you got anything you want me to take back up the hill?
Similar answer.
Well, don't know. Life inside.
Into a second, please. Into a single on Jules. And,
You all right?
two. Yeah, that's good.
So how important was the
Stand by, and off you go.
how important was the water supply?
Water was, of course, the most vital element of a besieged force. If you were going to set up and retreat it within a besieged area, water was your first priority. If you had no clean water, there was no point even entering into a siege. So it was absolutely the most vital resource.
One more for me, John.
Yeah.
What were your chances of survival?
Yep, okay.
Okay.
What with
Stand by.
water?
In general.
In a siege.
In a siege.
Okay, stand by, and off you go.
What were your chances of survival there, Chris?
It depended really on the supplies that had been set in. Many people obviously died of starvation within a besieged situation, and the citizens, the ordinary folk that weren't part of a regular army or militia, would have been in big trouble. So quite often, a lot of those people would have been the first to leave if an opportunity was given. The soldiers' chances of survival would depend entirely upon the terms that were offered. And if the terms were... Yeah. 23 years ago, I was taking the mickey out of almost... In this period or another?
Well, I was going to say, I'm not going to say out because that's wrong. The gear that you're wearing now, are you a soldier or a...
I'm a middling sort of person that's been roped into the war,
Yeah.
and no particular regimental affiliation at the moment, although
Right.
I'm part of the household essentially. So a lot of the household men would have become part of the garrison,
Yeah.
so, and we all knew how to fire guns and stuff.
Yeah. Where'd you get your glasses from? No,
These are copied from something else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Talking about revival.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And it's kind of, this is kind of fun for me because Colchester is where I grew up, and the siege is the big news there. Well, that and Romans, which of course you can't escape. But the whole, I'd lived there for years before I finally got the whole Humpty Dumpty story from
Right.
Colchester, which is this fantastic church tower which is there. And the top of it is all brick, modern, well, not modern brick, it's 18th century brick. But it was where this lone gunner was sighted, and the cannon was Humpty Dumpty. And then finally, it was blown off, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again.
Yeah. There was a good one too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Off you go. Water supply and...
But are you sealed not? Are you?
Well, I've been a member of a number of different societies. Which one you care to question me on, I don't know, really. That's a bit difficult because this is, insurance-wise, this is called the 30 Years War Society.
Yes.
If we say anything else, then the insurance could become...
Yeah, sure.
So
No, I mean,
we've
this is not being recorded.
Oh, right,
No,
okay.
it's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
no, just curious, because it's...
Oh yeah, I'm in
there are
loads of
groups
different,
within groups within
different
groups, aren't
organisations.
there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've also in the English Civil War Society and the Wimble Militia, part of the Wessex Garrisons.
And what got it for you? Is it the living history or the warfare side of it?
Originally, it was the active warfare.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe what it was like to be carrying a pike and actually... And then being, you know,
Okay,
surrounded
just
by
pretend that these guys were just on the hot now and one quiet.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe doing vegetables, you don't have to be quiet, you can make them Sorry, we're trying to get some sounds about that, lovely.
You got anything else to deal with?
Swish around.
Forest?
Can we have an apple?
Yeah, there you go.
That'd be nice actually, I thought you were in there.
That'd be lovely. Okay, stand by quiet, please.
Yeah, I'm going to do one more because the fire's changed. Yeah, stay away for a second. You're still in it. Me? You go to the shadow.
Saturday morning.
Work, isn't it?
If you just stop
What about in the
I've got a plan with that.
in the dark shadow?
Well, that's good for me, actually. Lovely.
Chris, as the siege wore on and everything within it, sorry, Ron. Done? Yeah. Okay. As the siege wore on, Chris, into its final agonising moments, morale inside must have been at absolute rock bottom. And frustration on the outside too must have been at an all-time high. Your chance of survival at that moment must have been incredibly low.
I think so. Obviously, they would have known inside that things were getting tight. And one of the things that really divided the times that we're talking about is the situation of religion, and the Protestants being the people often on the parliamentarian side, and those being inside, maybe being of a different persuasion, became crucial. And the vengeance that could be sought at the end of a siege, settle old religious scores, was sought to full advantage. And at Basing House we saw a culmination of some of the most barbaric incidences between religion besieged. Yeah, yeah. So I went off on one there.
That's all right.
So we'll stay wide and we'll come do another in.
I'll do another in. Yeah.
Just nice and brief one, George, to get straight into the,
Yeah.
to the question.
Okay.
Okay?
I help you. I work for you, don't I?
Did you want me to mention something specific there again? Forget.
Okay, stand by and then ready.
Chris, if we can kind of visit the scene where we're at the end of a siege, almost, when everything inside is practically been eaten, all the water is... No, rubbish, sorry, start again. Okay, everybody?
What's it like towards the end?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, stand by. Okay.
Chris, what would it be like towards the end of a siege when almost all hope, food, ammunition and parley, potentially, had gone?
Desperate times were in here. If all the negotiations had been done and denied, as the Royalists often did, the terms would have been no quarter, which would have meant no person of our sort of people would have survived. Maybe the rich could get away with negotiating a bribe to allow them to live, or they would be given some sort of terms to leave the house. But the likes of you and I, times by the end of a siege were desperate, and if you denied the opportunity to surrender during this period, without doubt there would have been the cry, no quarter, which meant that we'd have all been put to the sword.
So there would have been this huge bloodletting once the So the picture is one of huge bloodletting from frustrated and exhausted soldiers on the outside,
Yeah.
getting in and wreaking their vengeance across the entire population within.
Absolutely. A number of very good examples, the primary one being Basing House. As the troops stove through the holes in the wall that had been created through the engineering mathematics of Dalbier, they created these huge breaches in the walls of Basing. The troops charged through, and within 10 minutes the whole castle was in chaos. The house was in chaos. The rich people had fled to the basements, they were hiding, they were seeking refuge, and they knew they could buy their way out. The people like you and I would have been put to death. And there was a recent incident, 1990, a skull was found in a culvert at Basing House where the man had been executed, his head had been chopped off. He'd already received a major blow to his head, and the head had been kicked into a gully, not to be discovered until 1990. So it was barbaric. At the end, there would have been no quarter.
I left that.
Pretty good.
Isn't it?
Okay, George, so we'll start.
Okay, okay.
So stand by and when you're ready.
The sense is that as the siege wore on, the screw is being tightened, not just militarily, but psychologically and, of course, emotionally for both sides. And that any sense of order that might have been apparent when the siege had started had gone. There was no more clemency, there was no more mercy. That once you were in and you'd let them in, you were at the whim of the gods, really. Your chances of survival were practically zero, weren't they?
We're all too leading now. You've got to let the press answer. Stand by. When you're ready, please.
Okay. What kind of threats would the outside forces make to you, though, to try and wrap it up as quickly as possible?
The key threat would have been the statement, there will be no quarter, which would mean that everybody inside would be slaughtered. Up until that stage, there would have been various little ideas of torture and humiliation that would have been tried on the inside. And we know of instances where people had been captured when they were outside doing patrols of the garrison inside the besieging castle. They would be strapped to the mouth of a cannon and fired. The cannon would be fired.
Just blown to pieces?
Blown to pieces in front of you. And those sort of things were being played on you regularly.
But wouldn't that harden your resolve to stick it out?
Well, indeed it would, I think, and the cases both of Basing and Donington, where the Royalist cause stood to the end, showed that, because Donington, for instance, Sir John Boyd's 150 men, 17,000 people outside, he still refused to surrender until he'd received express and written permission from his king. And that was so hard to obtain. I mean, it's not like sending an email. He had to send a horse across 30 miles of hostile territory to get an answer back. If that man survived and the answer came back, he would surrender. And that is what happened. And that was the most honourable surrender in the Civil War, because all of the men survived. But they didn't know they were going to survive. They survived because they brushed it out beyond the no quarter.
But that surely isn't typical. I mean, for most sieges that were finally broken, that sense of chaos and bloodletting that would have gone on inside must have been horrific.
Indeed, and Basing again is our big example here, because we know there's good evidence that the house, 170 odd people left at the end, they were attacked. The walls had been mathematically broken down by the siege cannons of Dalbiat, who was a great stratagem and mathematician, first person to apply mathematics to a siege. The troops went through the breaches he created, and within 10 minutes the whole house of Basing was in chaos. The aristocracy had retreated. They knew they could buy their way out. The soldiers were killing, mass killing and looting. And in 1990 there was this skull discovered in a culvert that was evidence indeed of the immediate aftermath of a besiege, where a man had had a blow across the top of his head and then was decapitated. His head was kicked into a culvert, not found until 1990. So, I mean, the end days were desperate. The end moments were even more so. And the eyewitness accounts at the fall of Basing House were beyond imagination.
Good for me. I think that almost replaces the first. Okay. I mean, throughout all of this, though, time seems to be the crucial factor. Those on the outside want to speed it up. Those on the inside want to prolong it. How important? One of the things that strikes me, though, Chris, is that time is the crucial factor for both sides. On the outside, you want to speed it up, and on the inside, you want to play it out as long as you possibly can.
Indeed. Time was, indeed, the most crucial element for many sieges. If you could string it out until the winter, you knew that the besieging forces would lose heart and they'd go home. At Basing, there were 3 different, separate, distinct sieges which were broken through time, essentially. The soldiers got tired, they needed to return, they needed to resupply. And many of the soldiers, of course, we're not talking professional armies, these were people who'd volunteered, and they didn't want to be away from home for so long. They wanted to go back home and see their family, particularly at harvest time. So a harvest was a very dangerous sign for both armies, because people would go home to get the harvest in. In a besieging situation, come autumn, if you survived to autumn, you were doing well.
Yeah? Yeah.
I was just thinking that question. So, so you're in a situation, what's the best thing to do?
Oh, okay, yeah.
You're going to sit it out, you're going to take your chances.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, okay, that's a great.
That's great.
Okay.
So stand by, Jules, when you're ready.
Okay. There must have been some instances, though, when it became apparent to the commander on the inside of a siege that his best chance was just to take his chances against the siege line and try and break out.
Indeed. And if you'd already tried to break the siege line, and it would have been very difficult to have broke that siege line. Indeed. And if you'd already tried to break the siege line, and it would have been very difficult to have broke that siege line, but you knew where the weak points are, and there were chances, many people had many chances to get out. The difficulty was what was beyond the immediate besieging forces. It's quite likely you'd have been caught very quickly if you'd made it through those first lines, and then you would have been dealt death without any honour whatsoever. And we talk back again about the man being strapped to a cannon. You know, you'd have been used as an element to undermine the besieging forces if you were captured. They would execute you in front of your friends.
So if you've got nothing to lose, though, if you know they're going to come in and slaughter you anyway, you might as well just have a go and try and fight your way out.
Indeed, your best chance was to stick together and either negotiate the most honourable terms you could by fighting honourably, which is the evidence is that everybody that fought honourably was given honourable terms to surrender. If you fought dirty and you did not follow the rules and you held out for an awful long time and you were given many chances and many of the opposition had died, when you fell, you would have been given no quarter. So best chance is stick together and brass it out.
Do you think that there was a sense amongst both sides, in the Civil War in general, that there would be a peace at the end of it and that everybody would have to live together eventually, and that that underwrote this kind of sense of honour that emerges in some of these conflicts?
I think that's an element, definitely. One of the things that I think interests me in what you've just said is that we have to reflect again, this was a civil war. These were people that were quite often well known to each other, fighting on different sides, sometimes through no real reason. There might have been the obvious reasons of different religious affiliation, but there was also the unobvious reasons that I got friendly with this chap and I ended up in that army and my master called me to defend his house.